The story of Dunkirk. 400,000 Allied soldiers encircled by German troops on the beach of the eponymous town. The dramatic evacuation by mainly civilian boats prevented the complete annihilation of the British and French forces and went down in world history. When Christopher Nolan announced Dunkirk, many expected a traditional war drama of the kind that Hollywood had often produced. But Nolan, known for his unconventional narrative structures, created something completely different. A film that immerses the audience in the claustrophobic confines and overwhelming horror of war, without relying on typical war film conventions. Nolan's approach to Dunkirk was not to depict an epic battle, but the stark reality of survival in war. With minimalistic dialogue and a narrative structure that distorts time and space, he brought an intensity to the screen that is both overwhelming and hypnotizing at the same time. The evacuation of Dunkirk, known as Operation Dynamo, is one of the largest and most dramatic rescue operations in military history. In Dunkirk, Christopher Nolan interweaves historical precision with cinematic intensity by examining the evacuation from three perspectives: land, sea, and air. This narrative style opens up a deep understanding of the tactical challenges and the psychological stresses to which the soldiers and civilians involved were exposed. The land-based perspective dimly depicts the desperate situation of the soldiers trapped in the confines of the beach at Dunkirk. Dimly because Nolan doesn't go into the respective characters at all. He doesn't take into account any personal characteristics in the direct war zone that favor such bravery. It is not about heroism, but about mere survival, while the soldiers remain in an almost hopeless situation and hope for rescue. At the sea, on the other hand, the small boats collectively symbolize the civil courage and unwavering bravery of the British people.
What are you doing? You do know where we're going? France. Into war, George!
Nolan empathizes this collective effort and communal heroism by pushing the individual stories into the background, and thus placing the importance of collective action in the foreground.
Where's the bloody Air Force?
In the aerial perspective, which lies like a protective roof over the events, the strategic importance of air defense is revealed. Our pilots circling over the chaos of Dunkirk are both a harbinger of possible rescue and a symbol of the ceaseless fight against time and the sacrifice and moral of the civilians.
He's on me! 40 gallons for this one. 40 gallons, understood. Anchor, 11 o'clock. She's lining up to drop her load on that minesweeper.
And so, all three perspectives are linked across space and time in this way. The German side of the conflict intentionally remains in the shadows in Nolan's production. The German soldiers and their threat are never shown directly or depicted in detail. This intentional avoidance of depicting the enemy empathizes the perspectives of the protagonist, concerned and shifts the focus to immediate survival and the challenges of the evacuation. threat of enemy aircraft thereby becomes an omnipresent, invisible enemy, reinforcing the constant pressure and insecurity without becoming tangible through physical presence. The experience of the British and French soldiers thus becomes more tangible in a universal, abstract way. Nolan's Dunkirk is a crystal clear depiction of the war's decisive evacuation, which manages without the usual bombast of war films, but loses none of its tension and drama. The film focuses on the collective experience and bare survival, thus approaching the concept of the anti-war film, a long sought after ideal in film studies. A frequently discussed topic in film studies is whether anti-war films can exist at all. Francis Ford Coppola once said that every film about war is inevitably also a film against war.
This is the end, my only friend, the end of our elaborate plans, the end.
Dunkirk optimizes this thesis in a revolutionary way. Any film that portrays the horror of war in a visually and narratively impressive way runs the risk of glorifying war or distracting attention from the true horror. Nolan succeeds in showing war as an oppressive and nightmarish experience without romanticizing the excitement and visual fascination.
What's your name?
The film scholar sees the problem of the anti-war film in the exciting and fascinating depiction of war, which has a deterrent and simultaneously attractive effect.
Oh, she's turning. You must have damaged her.
Where's the escort?
I got one.
The aesthetics and dramatic structure of a film could soften the brutal reality of war by transforming it into a narrative and visual experience that might fascinate rather than scare viewers. Nolan avoids this trap by focusing on the immediate consequences of the situation. Dunkirk is a film about war, but it doesn't celebrate heroic battles or glorious victories. Instead, Nolan focuses on survival and the human experience in the face of war. The film poses the question of whether it is possible to retain one's humanity in such extreme situations.
I'm not going back. I'm not going back. Turn it around.
I'm not turning around.
Turn it around! Turn it around! Calm it down, mate! Turn it around! Calm it down, mate!
There are no grand speeches or patriotic monologues. The soldiers are not portrayed as heroes, but as people who are simply trying to stay alive. This portrayal of war as a state of struggle for survival and random cruelty makes Dunkirk an anti-war film. Nolan shows that there's no glory in war, only the desperate pursuit of safety and peace in the raging chaos. One of the most striking aspects of Dunkirk is Nolan's use of time and sound to heighten the tension and the chaos of the war.
68 gallons, Fortis leader.
Stay down at 500 feet to lead fuel for 40-minute fighting time over Dunkirk. Break.
Behind the apparent chaos, however, lies a precisely constructed structure. The 3 time levels, a week on land, a day at sea, and an hour in the air, run parallel and overlap, linked by an acoustic trick. The shepherd tone, an acoustic phenomenon that creates a continuously rising pitch that seems to never end.
Grenadiers, mate.
This effect, which was already used as the sound for the Bedport in Nolan's The Dark Knight, heightens the tension and sense of inevitability in the film. Their respective time level brings its own rhythmic quality to the film. The land perspective, which shows the desperate situation of the soldiers on the beach, reflects a static and agonizingly slow time of waiting. Time is like an endless, ponderous stream that empathizes hopelessness and patience. The sea perspective, on the other hand, expresses the dynamism and constant forward movement of the evacuation boats. The continuous movements of the small boats and the tireless rescue attempts create a time that is primarily driven by hectic activity. The air perspective represents the dramatic climax of this time structure. The British Spitfire pilots circling over the chaos of Dunkirk are not only guardian angels in the relentless battle, but also the time pressure that characterizes the entire film. Their flight over the battlefields becomes a symbol of the escalating battle against the clock and the constant threat that hovers over the events. Dunkirk does not end in a traditional climax, but in a state of constant change and incessant tension. The film thus becomes a resonance chamber for the human drama in the midst of chaos.
Blind us to the fact that what has happened in France and Belgium is a colossal military disaster.
Dunkirk is like a ceaseless, escalating symphony of war, in which every scene, every sound, and every dimension of time merge into a complete work that draws the audience deeper into a storm of events. The rhythms of chaos created by Nolan's structure and sound design are not only the pulsating heart of the film, but also a haunting metaphor for the ceaseless quest for survival and hope in the midst of pure destruction.